Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this 9th edition of the Youth and Leaders Summit. Youth, because this is who we are. Young students getting ready to get their skills, their knowledge, and their experience to become future leaders. Leaders from all walks of life, from politics to peace builders, from environmental defenders to science fiction, from business to philanthropy, from politics to communication, big and small leaders, national, local, global. It's all about leadership. Why did we choose the theme of leadership? Because we are faced with a world with lots of turbulence without a global anchor. A world where power is shifting. A world where power is diffusing, not only among states, but also between state and non-state actors. A world where conflicts, all conflicts, but also new conflicts, are multiplying with unbearable human suffering, and we see this every day. Where the governance mechanisms and the structures that we've given ourselves to govern our world, to manage our international affairs, are having a lot of trouble to play this role as guarantors of some sort of rules-based international order. It's an international system that is in need of reforms, where we are too slow in adjusting to a more decarbonized economy, and where the adjustments that need to happen to reduce emissions are felt by many as not having the right burden sharing. Where technological progress is allowing us to address many previously impossible achievements, from curing diseases to innovating and reaching new frontiers, but with technological change that makes it very difficult to govern, and more importantly, makes it very difficult to be socially adjustable to the pace of change. A world where divisions and walls are being built around identities, around religions, around political beliefs, where tribalism is back. This is a world that needs leadership. This is why the theme is leadership. Leadership in the form of inspiration, to lead with example. Leadership in the form of courage, the ability to, or the desire to want to do even if you fail and start again. Leadership as compassion, with this idea that we want to reject inequalities, reject injustice. Leadership as imagination, finding new ways to address old problems or new challenges that we have today. Leadership as the ability to deal with complexity. Leadership as a desire to connect with others. The Paris School of International Affairs, actually Sciences Po, is about leadership. The opposite of leadership is impotence, is powerlessness. It is to accept that we have no say in the manner in which the world works, that we have no say on the future. I know that many, including here in this House, feel that they have no say in the future. That's disempowerment, and this is not true. The dialogues you will hold today with lots of leaders will open your eyes to the way in which you can influence. You can take your future in your own hands. The ability that you have to operate change. The things to avoid also, because not all change is good. So we will also learn from leaders how not to do change. We are very lucky today to have incredible trailblazers from all continents, from all sectors, from all age groups, diversity to exemplify how diverse leadership is in the world. I want to thank them all for being here. Some have come from very far away, and I want to thank them for coming all the way to Paris to dialogue with our students. I also want to thank the New York Times, our partner for these 9 years. Our partnership today is represented here with Liz Alderman and Catherine Porter, two great New York Times reporters that would be moderating panels. I also want to thank the volunteers that have put many hours. You can recognize them. They are in their red shirts. They've put a lot of hours to make sure that this would be a very successful summit. Many thanks to all of you. And with these few words, let the 9th edition of the Youth and Leaders Summit begin. And let me call on stage President José Ramos-Horta, President of Timor-Leste, one of the world's youngest countries, 2002. As well as Michelle Bachelet, twice President of Chile, former head of UN Women. Two great leaders to get this conversation going. Let me start with President Ramos-Horta. As I said, new country, old problems. Every country faces the same challenges. The scale may be different, but the difficulties probably are the same. Mr. President, when you look at the world and you look at Timor-Leste, what changes would like a country like Timor-Leste want to see in the international system to make you more feel that the system is delivering for a country like Timor?
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Well, let me be very practical, succinct in view of the constraints of the time. What puzzled me most, shocked me most, is in several of the summits I have addressed, whether in New York, whether in Dubai, Doha, only two people, two speakers, the Secretary General of the UN and myself, the only two, touch on two main issues. One, foreign debt. The debt of developing countries, debt accrued to Western commercial banks at a draconian interest rates, 7–8%, and in spite of COVID-19, which destroy economies around the world, the impoverished people were made more impoverished. Child labor, child slavery went up exponentially. In spite of that, neither the G20, G7, commercial banks, anyone talk about writing off the debt for the poor countries. Second, since subprime crisis in 2007, ODA went down dramatically, never recovered. At that time, and now, only 5 countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, I think, the Netherlands, always responded, met the target of 0.7% of GDP for ODA. Under David Cameron, Foreign Minister of UK, Prime Minister of UK at that time. UK was the only G7 country that actually increased ODA to 0.7%. But now, of course, since then it collapsed. It never recovered. It doesn't mean that I have a greatest faith in the integrity of ODA, that the money pledged, the money promised, actually deliver and deliver to the field, to the people in need, to the governments that are struggling to develop their country. A lot of the money is wasted in studies, studies after studies, in missions, in evaluations, etc., etc. Asphyxiating bureaucracy of some multilateral institutions. So I would like to see that change to improve the lives of the poorest people in the developing world. Anything that doesn't really interest me much. Yeah. And I have to say, you know, I'm not like defending my kitchen or my, well, Timor-Leste, we are for those who are obsessed with the so-called Chinese debt trap, let me tell you, we have zero debt to China. B, our total debt is only 13% of our GDP, 13%, one of the lowest, if not the lowest in the world. And we have that debt only because we don't want to spend too much of our sovereign fund. And because our investment, the investments of our sovereign fund, we have a petroleum gas revenue, so we created a sovereign fund and we invest and we diversify the investment in portfolios, in financial markets. In the last 10 years, our return has been 8%. So why we use our sovereign fund to finance, we borrow from ADB, but we borrow only from ADB, Asian Development Bank, from IFC and the World Bank. So I'm not defending, you know, well, Timor-Leste heavily in that, so you have to criticize for, no, we owe nothing to Western commercial banks. So I have to clarify that.
So financing as a big challenge for smaller economies like Timor-Leste. Michel, Chile is not a young country. Chile is an old country, but probably with new challenges also. How can a country like Chile weigh in the international scene? What's the role for smaller but probably more affluent economies in today's world?
Well, I'm going to answer that, but I will answer a little bit about what you asked President Ramos-Horta, because I mean there's many things should change in the international system, but one of the things, and financing, I need to modernize and make the IFI, I mean the International Financial Institution, more, if I would say, flexible and adaptable to the reality of small countries, because sometimes countries like Chile that is considered middle-income country, but not main Chile, for example, many of the islands of the Caribbean Sea, when you see that comes a storm, and for example, they were really had money, tourism, and so on, and that disappears in a minute. So you can come be a middle-income country and come to a poor country immediately, but the rules of the OECD or even the IFI are so strict that people don't get any support. So that's one thing. But one of the more important things for me is more political. I would eliminate the veto of the P5 in the Security Council. I know after saying that I will never be Secretary General, but the veto I think is a terrible thing, because you see terrible things happening like in the Middle East or Ukraine, and the Security Council has been paralyzed. It's not been able to have a response that is at the stature of what is needed. But I go back to your question. Well, I think, of course, Chile is a small country in terms compared to others, but you know what? When you are not you're not a potential, I mean, when you don't have a military big capacity or an economic huge capacity, you are important because you can build bridges with other countries. You are not a threat for anyone, you know? And if you have good experiences, you can share the experiences with others. So you can be a country who can be with others. But that's one of the things with Latin America. Latin America needs to work together, not each country by itself. So what you need to work is in a collective way with others. So the voice of the small ones put together is like a big country. And then your voices can be heard. So that's what we have done in Latin America, in UNASUR or other ways, or GRULAC or other ways. So you can sit together with other countries, agree on a common purpose, on a common way of doing things, and then you can influence. Of course, you can also influence if you are a small country, but you have a good, for example, economic development, or you have good practices. And this is also good because you can have, for example, in the Global South, because in Africa, they will feel that the reality, for example, in Latin America, is closer to their reality. So if there's a very good, for example, social program, they can learn from it, we can work with them, and they can bring that to their own experience, and we can learn from them as well. So I think a small country has many possibilities in terms of understanding first what we are, but we can be on substance. When you know, there was a president of Brazil who always said that Chile has not so huge economic potential, non-military potential, but we had a conceptual potential because we have always been doing things in a different way, in an innovative way, and we have been successful in that sense.
So a bit of a glue that can glue countries that maybe bigger might have more difficulties to bring others around the table. President, Timor-Leste is about to become a member of the World Trade Organization. Why would a country like Timor-Leste want to be part of the World Trade Organization at the time when everyone thinks that the World Trade Organization is in serious need of reform?
Well, it's a bit like, if we were the US or China, we might not bother with rules and regulation. We might, we must just bulldoze our way through.
No, you will be imposing rules to others.
But as a small country, we understand, we know that our greatest interest, defense, is in a world that is really rules-based, that is fair, etc., etc. That's how I give you one little example. That should be a case study for you people. A case study in leadership, a case study in international problem solving. We had a long-standing maritime boundary dispute with Australia. At the time, Australia wanted the maritime boundary to be drawn at what they claimed the edge of Australian continental shelf, not on the basis of the median line as established under UNCLOS, whereby coastal countries overlapping in terms of the EEZ, you'd put a median line. Well, we resort to the UN system. Under UNCLOS, there is a clause that you are failing negotiations at all parties, but Australia, a civilized country, with a strong civil society, Australian public, the Australian government was compelled to agree to submit to a compulsory mediation by the UN. So we won the case. April 2018, in New York, we signed the treaty with Australia under the watch, the eyes of the Secretary General, establishing the median line. So this based on international law. If rules did not exist, well, the rules of the mighty. So while we were negotiating this, I was not involved in the negotiations. Our Prime Minister, current Prime Minister, who is right now in Jakarta signing land border agreement with Indonesia, Mr. Shanana Guzmão, super charismatic individual. He was the one who obsessed with justice, with the truth, with the border. He challenged everybody, and we prevailed. Little country, Lilliputian, and we succeeded. And so we decided to join. By not joining WTO, we said, okay, let's not join the UN. let's not join ASEAN. And who is worse, the UN or ASEAN? No, that's the reason we are joining WTO, as we join the UN, as we are joining ASEAN next year. Hopefully we'll become full members of ASEAN.
So the power of rules, which is what the international system offers every one of its members, whether big or small. Michel, you've been the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and that's not an easy job. How can we, in a world that is becoming more fragmented, how can we foster a kind of shared sense of values that at the end of the day is what underpins human rights? How can we become better human rights defenders?
I ask this question every day while I was High Commissioner, and you know me for years, and you can see that I'm much older after those 4 years in that office. Well, I think one of the things I have learned in life is that we shouldn't take for granted anything. Because sometimes you believe that after so many years, the world has understood that democracy is the best system. It's not perfect, but it's the best system. But today in the world, many people believe that democracy is not the best system, because they prefer, and many young people think that more important than to vote and elect is to have a government who is efficient. So sometimes they even prefer an autocratic government if it's efficient. And I'm going to go to, what I'm trying to explain is that what many of us thought it was like the truth, the well-known truth, and everybody shared that. That's not true. A lot of people does not share certain values and principles. And we have seen the eruption of the extreme right in the world. And some people think it's a trend. That is, now it's a cycle that will come to many places. And we see it here in Europe, we see it in Latin America, in many other places. So on human rights, it's the same thing. One thing, who could not agree with human rights? Who could not agree that everybody has the right to live safe, to have food, to have education, quality education, health, etc., etc. And probably in many of these areas, there are some agreements. But there are a lot of disagreements in terms, for example, of women, and the role of women and their rights, women's rights. And we have seen a setback on women's rights. And in the resolutions of the UN, the last resolutions of health last year in the summit, there was not a single mention of the singularities that are important on the health of women and girls. In the summit of the future, there are 5 pillars, but there's not a single pillar on women. And the problem is that they say mainstream it. I've learned when I was at UN Women, mainstream means disappears. No, it's everywhere. It's nowhere. It's everywhere and nowhere. So it's very complicated. That's why we're doing a campaign, no? To try to include more issues on women's rights. But on human rights, for example, sexual and reproductive rights, there are countries who are not agree whether the women has made their own options in terms of their sexual and reproductive rights, in terms if she has have children or not, and also if she wants to interrupt the pregnancy. And many people use culture as an excuse to not accept those rights. But you know, one interesting thing that I learned is, because I had to talk to all the countries of the world, and they tell you, look, this is Occidental, this is Western thing. It's not the whole world does not feel represented. But the truth is that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written and approved by many countries. Probably the countries who did not have much presence at that time was the African countries, because they were still colonies. They were not independent countries when the Universal Declaration. But they were Indian, Chinese, Latin American, Peruvian, Chilean, from the Caribbean. I mean, the people who wrote, and that was approved by the General Assembly at the time, was from all over the world. It was not Western. And I'll go back, you think I'm obsessed with the women issue, but on the women's issue, there were a person from the Dominican Republic, a person from India, a French woman, two from India, and some other country, but not Western, were the ones who insisted that instead of talking about the les droits de l'homme, because at that time, the word was les droits de l'homme, And Eleanor Roosevelt wanted to put le droit de l'homme. No? So these women were the ones who said, no, if you put the droit de l'homme, it will be used by governments against women. So that's why I talk about every person born. So what I mean to say is that human rights is not a Western construction. It's a universal construction. Probably, and also it's still very valid, because we still see how they are not completely accepted, and governments many times violate human rights. To the young people here, they might not know that violation of human rights is, according to the international law of human rights, is only the one done by governments. I mean, it's only the state who violates human rights. When the non-state actors do the same thing, it's called abuse. And it's a little bit unfair, because abuse sounds like less bad, and sometimes really bad what they're doing, some groups. I was talking with the ambassador of Mozambique 2 nights ago, and in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado, there are these terrorist groups that, behead people. And when they report, we couldn't say that they violate human rights because they're not state actors. So what can we do? I think we need to continue with young people in particular. And the other problem is when you talk to some young people in the DRC, we were there, and they had this great group of students who were going house by house explaining people their human rights. And I asked them, what are the bigger difficulties that you have? And they tell us, human rights? I had never had any right in my life. What are you talking about? So the problem is that I think it's a difficult question, a difficult answer to how you solve it. But I think we still need to educate. Young people should be raising their voices about, why I say educate, because you need to know which your rights are to defend them, to participate and ask for them. Otherwise, if you don't know your rights, as those people who are saying, I never had any right in my life, why are you going to organize yourself and participate, unless you are really somebody who has a leadership, a strong leadership? But we need to help young people, to support them, to mentor them, so they can have strong leadership and they can raise their struggles. May it be human rights, may it be climate action, may it be another thing, So I think we need to think a lot on youth on this behalf, because they are the present and the future, and we need to continue working strongly in the multilateral system to monitor and make accountable. Because the other problem is that nobody's accountable. And you see so many peace agreements that are being signed, but people continue violating human rights and nothing happens. So there's impunity, and we cannot accept impunity. We need governments and all stakeholders to be accountable by their acts, and there should be no impunity. So then people will say, okay, should I violate again human rights or not? So that's why the ICC, the International Criminal Court, or the ICJ, are so important, because it shows governments and shows people who are making decisions. Look, in the pandemic, there was a lot of health restrictions that were okay. But, why lack of press freedom? That's not a restriction. So many governments used the pandemic to stop citizens from knowing things. So I think we need to be aware, that's why we need something like the Human Rights Council, the Office of the High Commissioner, so we can monitor the situation in countries, we can call countries, and we can speak out. And why it's important to speak out? Because then the people don't feel abandoned. They don't feel they're alone, because somebody is there, somebody knows. For example, people in Myanmar, we were always talking about against the violation of human rights by the Tatmadaw, and so on. So we need the voice of the international community, but the eyes of the international community to be monitoring and following, so people know that they cannot do whatever they want. They need to respond to the rules, in this case, to the rules of the international laws, and of course to the human rights organizations that are really looking after. And we need to support NGOs who work on humanitarian or human rights issues, because they are close to the field. They are with the people there. They know the reality, and they can take action.
Thank you. This was a tour de force. A tour de force with lots of good ideas for many of the students who, by the way, are also studying human rights and humanitarian action. In a moment, I'm going to open the floor for your questions, so you can start lining up. There are mics on both sides of the aisle. But before we do that, Mr. President, we've talked about climate change, and this is also a very stark reality in a country like Timor-Leste. How do smaller economies that are more vulnerable but are also on the forefront of the impact of climate change, how do they adapt? How do they prepare? How do they get ready?
Well, we, Timor-Leste, we have been a leader in the LDCs and small island development states. Our negotiating team, technical team, they have been tremendously successful, credible. Became elected spokespersons for the LDCs, small island states, and for the loss and found. It was very much a struggle led by Timor-Leste, and that was adopted in Dubai, COP28. This what we can do on the international level. On a domestic level, each of us, I always say, partly pragmatic, is that let's stop finger pointing. Good or bad, we all benefited from the three industrial revolutions. We benefited all, some more, some less, etc. The planet is damaged. It's damaged. And let's not waste time in international forum, so I tell our people, and I will tell island states and others, in our own country, let's replenish the forest that ourselves we cut down over generations. Let's clean up all the garbage, the plastics that no one brought it here. We bought it, then we throw around. We poison our rivers, our lakes, our seas, etc., etc. Let's plant trees everywhere. So, at least on my side, even before I became again president, I was former president, I supported two initiatives. One called With One Seed, an Australian gentleman, individual who bright ideas. He came to Timor-Leste, met with me. We launched the initiative more than 10 years ago to plant trees, particularly mahogany, but everything identified with GPS. We have planted in that small area. So please, take into proportion the size of our country, because you have to say 300,000 trees. Well, in China is nothing. Or in Brazil is nothing. But 300,000 trees in Timor-Leste is a lot of trees. So in 10 years, we planted 300,000 trees. And all verified. Not so many programs you hear about 100 million trees. I don't mention countries. 100 million trees in a particular country, letter T, began with T. Another one, a certain million trees in another one in Horn of Africa, begin with letter E. But then when you verify, only 10% survive. In our case, the 300,000, everyone verified. Then experts came from UK, from the Netherlands, to verify. A few years ago, as former president, I signed the first carbon certificates. We sold, Timor-Leste was the first country to sell carbon certificates. Again, for the standard, the size of France or whatever, it's nothing. But I was shocked myself. A few months later, we received more than $200,000 in cash to be distributed to the communities that were part of the program. So each of us, we do what we can. A Timorese NGO called, I know only the name of the man in charge, because he's a famous Timorese singer, Ego Lemos. He launched an initiative to recover water sources without any major technology. It's just all manual, rudimentary, traditional. In the last 10 years, he has recovered 300 water sources, fresh water sources, because one of the big problems in the world, in our region, is water stress. Another 20 years, 30 years, we will all be fighting over water. As you know, if you don't, let me tell you, one reason why there is no life in planet Mars, because there is no water. And so this is a problem. Only 1% of the available water in the world is accessible to people, by people. So this is is a human right, is a security issue, it is survival of it. And that has to do with the environment, with so. Of course, climate change for us, yes, total mess. In the past, in my country, 1st of November, every year, 1 in the afternoon, like Swiss clock, begin rain. Now, you don't know whether, first November, so 1st November is, I think, All Saints or All Souls, 1 o'clock p.m., begin rain. Now can be November, can be December, can be in January, and then by April, when we're supposed to be harvesting, well, come heavy rain, destroy all the harvest. So these are the consequences. And yet, we, Timor-Leste, are responsible for CO2 emission. We are responsible only for 0 point, and you add many, many zeros, at least from where I sit all the way to the end of the room. That is our responsibility. But I tell people, let's not waste time in forums, playing heroes, attacking the US, the Europeans, the Japanese, or whatever. It is done. And partly also because of their ingenuity, with medicine, with vitamins, with Botox, with stem cell, we're all getting younger. And so thank you.
So, President, you'll be happy to have a conversation with Felix Finkbeiner, who's the founder of Plan for the Planet, who's going to be speaking later and who has as a mandate to plant millions of trees that take roots. Let me start with the gentleman over there, and then we'll take 3 questions. If you could say briefly who you are and what your question is, so that our panelists can take them. Please.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Good morning, President. Thank you for being here. Good morning, everyone. And my name is Stefano. I come from Italy, and I have a question about rules. Today, we talked about rules, about borders, about human rights. Today is also the day where the International Court of Justice rules on the genocide going on in Gaza. And I wanted to ask, what is the value of rules in a world where they seem to work for the few and not for the many, where there are countries that supposedly uphold these rules but then do not follow them when it doesn't suit them? So what is the role of us as young people, of US leaders, to change this?
Thank you, Stefano. Let me take, so the value of rules in a world where rules are being respected depending on. Gentleman over there.
Hello, good morning. I first want to thank you, Madame Michelle Bachelet, for being here. I am a refugee student here in Sciences Po. I come from Colombia. I grew up seeing you in the news every day, and I admire you. Thank you for being here. So my question, I think, is linked to my other colleague's question, which is basically, right now we see violations of human rights across the world, but when it comes to the country we live in, especially here in Europe, we don't, it's like this line is blurred. For example, what happened a couple of days ago with the immigration law that luckily yesterday the Constitutional Conseil Constitutionnel declared 40% of the text inconstitutional. Anyway, how do we, what can we do to make the world respect these rules that we have that we agreed upon to respect? Because it seems like there is no mechanism that we can use to make them being respected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll take a 3rd question. So the first 2 are about the values of rules and how to make them respected. Gentlemen?
Thank you to the guests. I am Tinuka Mbikenzo from France. I will ask a question to President of Timor-Leste. As you know, the world is watching what is going on in Ukraine and in Gaza, and they receive a lot of support from all around the world. However, nobody reacts, including UN, to what is going on in Western Papua. Indonesia is colonizing Western Papua since the middle of the 20th century, and I would like to know what is the position of Timor-Leste on the situation of Western Papua. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Michel and then Mr. President.
I would say that if you look at the world today, it's true that it's not a very optimistic view. There are some countries who are the big ones who are supposed to be approved those rules, but not always follow the rules. So someone could feel very pessimistic and say, so what do we need those rules for if nobody follows it? But the truth is that you still need the rules, because those rules can help you to make accountable countries who are not respecting the rules, who are not respecting international laws. Because, you know, countries can go into a war, but even in a war, there are rules. There are humanitarian rules, there are rules of engagement, and there are things that are not acceptable. But that's why I told you that I thought that was an important thing we should need, is if we need to think on reform of the UN, is the reform of the Security Council. Because it's the Security Council who is dealing with those conflicts, who has to ensure that the rules are respected and had to take measures. But when you have a Security Council who was the architecture and the representation is post-Second World War, does not represent the reality of the world today. There are big countries that should be there as permanent members, and not only as non-permanent members, that should play a bigger role, because the role they're having today, politically or economically, in the world is different than when it was created. And the second thing, other than representation, is the P5, the 5 countries who have the right to veto. So you cannot go forward because they veto it. So one country presents a resolution, for example, on Ukraine or Gaza, humanitarian or whatever, and one country can veto and you are there without anything. So, but having said that, that's the reality, and we need to work with reality. And we need to work on reality, but on the other hand, I think young people should raise their voices against what they feel is unfair, is horrible, is inexcusable. And because we are all have raised our voices, being president or former president, we all are raising our voices or in the UN against what we think is unacceptable. And I think young people who should organize themselves and should raise their voices, because if I call protest, you're going to say that I'm organizing a demonstration here. But I mean, you need to expose your indignation in terms of things that cannot be accepted. But also, each of you, with others in your own countries, you can organize yourselves to bottoms up, push your governments to do the right thing. Because I think a world where there are rules but there's no accountability, it doesn't work that way. Because then there's rules, but anybody can decide if they do follow it or not. The other thing that I believe in is that many times where there is a conflict or there is a violation of human rights, the rest of countries decide to expel that person from a council or from the UN or whatever. I don't agree with that. Because I think that if somebody leaves somebody, don't feel responsible anymore. I think it's better to be sitting in the table, if I may say, use that figure, so you can hold the people accountable. And they have to explain or they have to change what they're doing. So it's better to have people inside than outside, feeling that they can do whatever they want. It's not easy. Sometimes it's really, really, how could I say it? Disappointed. But you know what? We cannot give up. We have to have hope that the world can be better if we play a role. You are young, but in the future, you are going to build a future. And you can be somebody in your countries or in the international arena. So never, never lose hope. Follow your conviction. Follow what you believe in. Get close to other people and make make you stronger with others together. And never give up, never give up. I have to say that to myself every day when I was in Geneva, because many times you do whatever you could and nothing happens. It was really frustrating, but you cannot give up, because you know why? Because those people there on the field, they need us. They need us, they need to know that they're not alone. They need to know the world cares, because that's the main thing that I received many times from many countries. There were people, young people were being killed in the streets and so on, because they were protesting because of the coup d'etat or something like that. And they said, nobody listens to us, we don't know. Nobody hears us, we are here by ourselves. And they're not by themselves. Of course, it's not happening what we would like to happen, but at least they will know that there's some hope. There are some people trying to do as much as possible to change the situation. And I think there's a lot of people trying to do a lot in the current conflicts. So let's support them, let's help them, and then let them know that you care.
Thank you, Mr. President.
For those of you who are not familiar, the question to do with parallel comparison, West Papua, Gaza, Timor-Leste, etc. Let me say first, Indonesia today is unrecognizable compared with 20 plus years ago. It is a dynamic democracy, might be imperfect, like the Indian or the US democracy, but it is a very dynamic democracy. Civil society extremely active, even during the Suharto era. There is more media per capita, mainstream media, newspapers, television, radio, than any country in the world. Social media is rampant. Compare the case of West Papua is a bit like comparing Alaska and West Papua. You know, West Papua is part of Indonesia, historically speaking, because when we, Timor-Leste, fought for independence, self-determination, the fundamental argument was that Indonesia was not the successor state to any territory other than the territories of the so-called Dutch East Indies. Like in Latin America, Latin Americans became independent. You became independent on the basis of the past treaties or boundaries between Spain and that imposed by Spain, and in some cases with the British and so on. So Indonesia inherited what was the then Dutch East Indies. Timor-Leste was never part of the Dutch East Indies. For 500 years, it was Portuguese territory, like many others surrounding us, Flores and elsewhere, but in the struggle with the Dutch took over, and the treaty was signed in 1800 something, established the current border. So that's it. West Papua was always that. Understandable in multi-ethnic, multicultural countries. There are, even in Europe, you know very well, there are dissension, you know, because identity or whatever. But Indonesia today has very strong democracy. They have elections next month. And the case of West Papua is known throughout Indonesia. And there is no carpet bombing of West Papua like it happened in Gaza. And so that's the difference. My only comment, final comment, on this issue and many others that happen in Europe is that when we countries, leaders inherit territory, well, unfortunately, you inherit also the people. You know, you don't only inherit the territory. And it would be great probably for some of the leaders, some of the countries, that you get the territory, but the people, well, go elsewhere. And that's the problem always in these many multi-ethnic countries. Because of treaties, boundaries, some people very distinct integrated into a larger territory. Happened in Europe, in the Iberian Peninsula, and elsewhere, you know that. So, and my advice always is, make everybody feel that they are part of the nation, part of the country. Diversity, different languages, different beliefs, is actually a blessing for the country. A country that's so multicultural, multi-religious, so vibrant, you know, is a bit not like, you know, the boring Finland. You know, I apologize to any Finnish. Sorry, yeah, I don't apologize to Finnish people here. And, or even boring Chile, you know, you don't have many ethnic groups. No? Or unlike Brazil, you know, Brazil is amazing. You know, so, and that is great. You know, Indonesia has, you know, hundreds of ethnic groups, languages, religions. It's amazing. I was in my hotel in Jakarta once, in Borobudur Hotel. Look out of my window, I saw the cathedral right there near my window. And Indonesia is the largest multi-majority country in the world. And they have this vibrant Catholic Christian community. So I hope Indonesians will further embrace West Papuans, that they feel they are really part of the nation.
Thank you. Let me just briefly take the last two questions.
Thank you. Well, I'm Valentina. I'm from Buenos Aires, Argentina. And it's a real pleasure to have you two leaders and presidents of your countries. My question is more a political one. It's like, as you've been presidents and also leaders of the world, I wanted to know how pragmatic and how ideological we should be. Also thinking of the global south, like there is sometimes, when you talked, Michel, about the UNASUR and the PROSUR, I was thinking that that's great, but sometimes it gets very ideological and it doesn't stand in the long term. So I was thinking about which would be your answer in those terms, like how to manage this pragmatic and ideology in your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentina. And the last one.
Good morning. My name is Andres. I'm from Spain. First of all, thank you very much for being here this morning. I'm sure it's a great pleasure for everyone in this room to be sharing the space. My question is related to financing and sovereign debt. How could the rules be changed in international financial institutions in a way that will not reduce the incentive for finance to take place and to eventually avoid reducing the amount of finance channeled towards developing countries? And what is more to blame? Is it the internal rules and regulations of existing financial institutions, or is it the conditions that have traditionally been established as necessary for finance to take place? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a very, very little one because we are outside the time.
Yes. Good morning. So my question is for President José. So you worked with the UN in Guinea-Bissau. How did the lessons learned in Timor-Leste in the late 20th century, and how did these lessons help you in your mission in Guinea-Bissau, and what things you could do right that maybe you didn't happen that well in Timor-Leste? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, for me, to be pragmatic has the sense of the Greek. The Greek said to be pragmatic is the possibility to transform your dreams in reality. So how you deal with both? I mean, your ideology makes you decide which is the priorities that you have to push for, And my case, of course, is social justice, eliminating the inequalities, ensuring the rights of some. So that is sort of you have sort of a framework that your ideology gives you, or your political view, if you don't feel this ideology. I was very happy that you didn't ask me about current situation in Argentina, I should say. I would have answered you, but not. So, I mean, but the way you move towards those dreams is in a more pragmatic way. But also, I would say, you have to, well, in my case, it was very easy because I've been a public servant for many years. I never to work in the private sector. So to be in government was something that I knew, and you are learning how governments work, because the difficulty for people who have never been in government is to learn. It takes some time. So I knew what works and what doesn't work. But I'm not talking about bureaucratic thing. I'm talking also, and also I was in politics. So it depends, of course, if you have majority in Congress, for example, or not. And if you don't have majority in Congress, you have to decide which laws that will make the people's life improve, which one of those you're going to send the first time, and how you're going to build alliances with others so they can support that idea. So you have to do a mix of things, you know. You want to push, you need a new law, for example, on, pension reform, or on whatever, because there, I mean, depending on the problem, or the reform of the health system, or whatever of that. My first recommendation will be do it immediately as you arrive, the things that are more difficult. Because when you are win an election, everybody loves you. We talk about the honeymoon, like for a month. Mm-hmm. And then, but nowadays it's even smaller, shorter. My current government right now, they didn't give him like a day of a honeymoon for them. So, so you have to look at, I mean, during the campaign, of course, you're looking and deciding. Well, my first thing I saw is you have to be ideological, you have to be pragmatic to make those a reality, but you never have to promise what you're not going to do. You can promise something that maybe in the future you are not able to do, because the economic situation, you know, you thought that would be possible, it was not possible. But some people promise things they know they're not going to do. I remember talking to certain guys from the companies, and because I was doing a tax reform, and they're trying to convince me that I wouldn't do the tax reform. And I said, but excuse me, I promised from the first day of the campaign that I wanted to do. You never heard about it? I said, oh yes, but we thought you were only talking about it. It was not serious. But for me, to do a reform of education, there are permanent costs. You have to need permanent incomes. And the permanent incomes in a tax distribution that was really unequal, so the poor people at the end, comparative to their salary, pay more than the rich one. We needed to do a progressive reform on tax. So you could do health, better education, etc., etc. So many times you will have a lot of allies, a lot of people against these more progressive policies. But that's when you need to, on one hand, inform the population. Why, what and why are you doing that? Second, you need to build alliances with other political parties or other people. Well, I was the first government of a coalition of 5 parties, and the last government, the second one, 7 parties. Believe me, that's not an easy task to put everybody and to agree. But it can be done, it can be done. But I think you have to do both. Have an ideology or a vision, what you want to do, but also try to have results. Sometimes there is something that for you is so important, so symbolically important, that you know you're going to lose it in the parliament, but it's important for the population to know that you send it because the country has to debate of these issues, like, for example, sexual and reproductive rights. We didn't know when we sent the law for interruption of pregnancy for 3 causes. And I sent for 3 causes, even though I'm a medical doctor and I believe that every woman should have the choice they want. But there was no political agreement in my coalition. So I sent them for 3 choices with the first step. And it was important, we won it, but it took us the 4 years of government to be approved. So that's what I tell you. Sometimes you know some things will be very, very difficult, but you work hard, you try to build alliances, to try even with the opposition, people who might be more open-minded, that can understand, and at least they can don't vote against it. In some places they said to the people, oh, I have to go to the dentist. Why don't you go to the dentist? So you don't vote against it, your friends from your party are not against you. But it's a joke, but some people does it. They negotiate that kind of things. Why don't you feel a terrible headache or something? No, because they want to support you, but they cannot, because their party are not for it. So I would say it's a mix of analyzing reality, identify which can be the best strategies, identify which can be your supporters, and I would say try to be strong, because there's a lot of pressure, but you can do. And I forgot to tell before that a world without rules is even worse what we have today. Because when they ask what can we do when the rules are. But so I would say it is possible to combine both things. But for that, I think one thing that I learned in Spain, a word called Adanismo. Adan, was the first man, supposed to be, according to the Bible. And the people who are Adanistas, and you are young people, probably you will tend to be like that, is before me, nothing. Nothing was worthy. Nothing was good. I come now into politics, and I know what needs to be done. I think youth participation and young people participating is very important because they're fresh ideas, innovative ideas, but it's not true that I was the best and nobody else knew what was. I mean, all of us need to build on what was built before and have more ambitions and more goals and go forward. But Adanismo doesn't help because at the end you learn that it was not possible to do everything you wanted. And sometimes it's that is, I mean, the reality is that you cannot get everything you wanted. Sometimes you can, so then you have to choose your battles. Choose the battles you feel are more important so you can win it. And I mean, I could be speaking for hours, so I will stop here. And in terms of the financing, maybe José will want. I think, I mean, for example, Kristalina Georgieva in IMF, she has been trying to change rules. She has been trying to change certain concepts. But I think all these international organizations, there are lots of countries. I mean, leadership is important, but it's not enough. Because if you don't have the support of member states, it's very difficult to change the rules. So I think both things need to be looked at it. The rules, but also how, what was the other thing that you mentioned here? Let me see. I mean, the rules, the regulation, or something that I cannot read. So, but I think you have to look at the whole IFI, see what works well for countries, particularly for developing countries, because José was mentioning in terms of the debt, and what doesn't work, and then you have to do the reforms. But again, if the big powers are against it, it will be very difficult. But I hope someday, because I try to be optimistic, that the member states need to understand, and I think, I have to tell you, and I finish right now. I thought that the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, will make people in the world realize the changes that will be needed, because the pandemic laid bare the inequalities inside societies and between countries. So I said, when people said, we want to go back to normality, I would say, no, we cannot go back to normality. That normality produced a terrible crisis because the poor countries were not prepared, and nobody was prepared, neither the rich countries. And I thought, I hope it will be like the Second World War, that people realized that we needed this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that we needed sort of, I would say, a minimal ethics for everyone, minimal rights for everyone, because the war showed the horrors of what happened. But that didn't happen with the pandemic. Everybody wanted to go back to normality. I was thinking, you saw what happened in the response to pandemic. There was no solidarity on countries. Everybody was scratching by its own, and the poor countries didn't have vaccine until very late, and didn't have any other thing. there was a lot of solidarity between scientists. They did share information and all that, and the advances on the vaccine and other stuff, but not countries. And I thought it would permit that to change the way. And then and I think we're in a tipping point in the UN now. I mean, not us, I mean the world, because or we go the right way, and I think that the Summit for the Future in September is looking at that, or we do go in the right direction, or humanity will be really in trouble. And I hope the Summit for the Future will permit to have certain reasonability, certain possibility. So let's not lose hope. Even I'm not very optimistic, but I should not lose hope.
President.
Before I answer directly your question, I share with you my first experience ever in doing a complicated, complex mediation. In '97, and in all places, it was somewhere in Colombia. One day I was in Europe, I got a message from a Colombian friend who told me there were 15 teenage hostage, all girls, and they had information, and for many months no one was able to access them or to meet with their captors. They had information that the ELN would talk with me. So I said, that's fine. So I flew to Bogota. Sometime, I think, in 97 or 98. My first trip to Colombia was in 97. I was doing a tour of Latin America after receiving a Nobel Peace Prize to talk about Timor-Leste. I went to Chile and met with Artur Aluin, Patricio Aluin, and Roberto Garreton, all these great people from Chile. Yeah, and so in that context that I got to know people in Colombia, so I went there. To make the story short, the negotiations happened inside a high security prison, somewhere near Medellin. I had to go from Bogota to Medellin, and then a smaller plane to where the high security prison is, of course, authorized by the authorities. Everything had been pre-negotiated with the authorities. The military gave me radio equipment so that I can, from the inside prison, communicate with the rebels. But the leaders of the ELN were in prison, 2 Jesuit priests. They were there in prison. And they were the real leaders who would order the fighters to. So I began by, they knew all about East Timor. You know, these are Jesuit priests, usually highly educated. And they knew all about East Timor, they knew about me, they knew about our leader, Shanana. And so we spent several hours just chatting, get to know each other, and as human beings. Then I told them, I said, listen, you know I'm not an American, I'm not German, and that means I don't have any money. And I told them, and I'm not going to pay you anything, because the ELN, like FARC, they kidnap for ransom. That's how they make money, particularly ELN, because they have, FARC has many more businesses, you know, and ELN was less rich. Mostly they do kidnapping. And so I said, I'm not going to pay any ransom. If you wanted to talk with me, it's because you respect me, respect my people, my country. And I told them, I said, listen, what are you going to do with these children? No one is going to pay any ransom. Are you going to kill them? I don't think you will. And I told them, speaking in Spanish, in my country, if at the time we were still fighting, in my country, if ever our movement kidnapped any civilian, anyone, killed anyone, I would quit right away. I don't believe in any cause, political cause or religious cause that justify killing of innocent people. And then I use, strong Spanish language, mierda por todo esto. Yeah. ¿Qué mierda de lucha esta? And of course, the people around me, like UNICEF and others, they're so scared, you know, the kind of language you're using to. Well, you know, I came out, we went in, I think, 2 in the afternoon. I came out, I think, 9 p.m. with an agreement, with a sign, read out to the media. If you Google patiently, you will find a reference to it in Washington Post or in CNN, because there was covered. A few months ago, I had not much to do one weekend, so I Googled and found my... So my point is, so I got them released, 0 ransom paid. You know, you have to show empathy for the people who did these actions. You have to understand them. And on the other hand, the lesson is they needed face saving. They would have never surrendered these kids to the government, to the military. And they would surrender only to me. So, then of course, I went to the mountains, you know. The next day, flew somewhere, helicopter to wherever the hostages were. I met with the hostages, with the kidnappers. They all had masks. I never saw their face. Only they demanded that I sat there like this, but with all the rebels. And they went on 3-hour press conference, attacking the government here and there. Everything had to be broadcast. And 3 hours, I had to stand up a few times to go to the bush toilet, come back, they were still talking. And then finally, all hostages were released. Guinea-Bissau, I was asked, when I finished my presidency, Ban Ki-moon called me whether I would go to Guinea-Bissau, a special representative, because there was a coup that had happened there. Many, many other coups happened there before. In 40 years of independence, there are so many coups. No government ever served full term. I said, yes, I go. I know Guinea-Bissau, I know the people, and I refused this UN, armor-plated car. I refused armed security with me. My Timorese security went with me. I said, listen, don't bother taking any weapons. If you don't have weapons with you, there is some traffic accident, and the people start, shouting, screaming, confusion. You are not going to shoot anyone by accident. So, second, if the general wants to attack us, it's not your little pistol that is going to save us. So I don't want any weapon around me, and no security car. Because I tested one, the security car. I tried to wind down the window. It couldn't. Of course, it's a security car, so you're not going to wind down. And a very heavy car and very uncomfortable. So I was always in connection with the people. I would go myself to the market. It's called Caracol, I think, the market. My philosophy at the time was bring the UN to the people. I'm not going to stay in this compound. And I told the UN personnel, I didn't come here to serve you. Any problem, you talk to the Chef de Cabinet. If he doesn't listen, here is my number. You contact me. My WhatsApp, at the time, don't know WhatsApp, my SMS, email, etc. But I'm not going to deal with it. I'm coming here to assist the people here. 2 things in all situations: empathy for leadership is empathy. Of course, leaders, you have to be smart, you have to study, you have to be reachable, accessible. In my country, my presidency, no iron gates. Anyone from the street vendors, they walk into the garden of the president. Every day is full of children. I don't mention the names. A few days ago, some country, their ambassador is going to Timor. They're always heavily armed. I said to my staff, tell them, no weapons into my building. They can come into the garden, fine, but into my building, no weapons. If they don't want, okay, don't come. and I'm not going to change my rules. Of course, in some countries, that's much more difficult if you are. So I totally understand that. I'm talking about my little country. That's how my rules are. Because I want to end, this a bit about leadership. I heard your speech, and yesterday at the dinner, I talked almost exactly verbatim what you were talking about leadership.
Oof. Oof.
And I add, it says, sometimes I find next generation. I have done so many talks. We hear things like, the youth are the future. Well, that is a cliche. We all know that. You don't need to have a PhD to discover that youth are the future. Today, you are 21, next year will be 22, et cetera, et cetera. And the question is what you choose to do. If you want to be a scientist, focus on the computer, yes, be a topest scientist, not to be a mediocre one. And to be of usefulness to the country, to the society, to be the pride of our parents who spend so much money on you, be the best whatever you do. Even if many of you, and some of you probably end up in Wall Street or whatever, I've seen this so many times. I met some US congressmen, when I first met them, they were kids, like Patrick Kennedy. When I first met him, he was 11 years old. His father, Ted Kennedy, introduced me to him. And then many years later, he became a congressman. Well, great congressman, very humane, very caring, like most Kennedys. It doesn't mean necessarily, because if youth change the world, well, we would have changed it by now. And so I don't like this rhetoric, this, the youth, we are going to change the world, etc. I gather you from here, the Sciences Po, you will set up a club, all of you together, brothers and sisters, and all working together in one building and change the world. Each of you will go to your different countries and different cities. But wherever you are, show compassion in the family, in the community, in the streets. Of course, I'm not very good at supporting social sciences, at supporting humanities, because in my country, everybody goes to humanities. And I have to say maybe because it's the easiest degree. And more difficult to go to mathematics and so on. But recently when I talked to year 12 students who finished, I told them, listen, study about water, study about digitalization, study about renewable energy. In the next 5 years, our country is going to be completely digitalized. Please study artificial intelligence. Extremely important, useful, but very dangerous also. One of the greatest challenges, dangers, risks for societies now is artificial intelligence. Madam President, one of these days, we could hear you speaking, Madame Bachelet, your voice, your face, your voice, saying something else completely different from what you believe. They are doing this already. Will disrupt societies, destabilize societies, cause conflicts. So, instead of study humanities because it's easier, simpler, doesn't require a huge IQ. Sorry, I know I'm joking because I was never a great student anyway. So if you, yeah, so I'm no one to criticize any student, and I always had average marks. Partly because I always studied just before the examinations, like the day before.
So don't follow the president's advice.
So that's my last message, my message to you. Great people, you, wonderful young people. Yeah, the future in your hands. We are walking towards the horizon. And not really towards the horizon, because you never reach the horizon. I mean, we're walking towards sunset. And, yeah, in that sense, the future is yours, but for those who really believe. So the other day I was with the Pope in Rome. I told him about my frustration about the world situation. He agreed with me on many points. I will not quote him because, it would be such a sacrilege. But he said, but we must continue, debemos continuar a luchar por la paz. We must continue to fight for peace. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me end with my favorite quote, and it's so favorite that I have engraved it in my favorite pin. And it reads, neither optimist nor pessimist, be an activist. Thank you. Thank you to Michelle Bachelet and José Ramos-Horta. Thank you. Give them a big applause, and we move to the next session.